Tonight, to help us chew the political fat, are Emily Ashton from BuzzFeed and The Guardian's Raphael Behr. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us tonight. And let's start with those comments on red lines from Nick Clegg, and let's just remind ourselves exactly what he's been saying.
Well, I've set out the deal breaker, if you like, the fact that we won't compromise on, as you put it, this red line on education, because education, particularly early years, school education, helping the most disadvantaged children, is central to the Liberal Democrat vision of spreading opportunity to all people, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. But you're right, there will be, of course, other commitments, other red lines, if you like, which I will announce in the coming days.
So that was Nick Clegg with his red line. Education funding, a red line, it's a deal breaker, Raphael. What do you make of his comments?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about Nick Clegg and the Lib Dems, they're a curious position that they've been in government for the last 5 years, and yet they're in danger of slipping completely from sort of any kind of relevance in this election. They're on sort of 8%, 9% in most of the national polls. And so what Nick Clegg really has to do is just remind people that they're sort of in the game, that, you know, because it's likely to be a hung parliament, and if you've got 20 or 30, they'd hope 30 or more Lib Dem MPs, ultimately that could swing the balance of power, and that could decide what forms the government. And so they really have to try and sort of insert themselves in the debate somewhere. And before 2010, education was quite a strong subject for the Lib Dems, going back even longer. They used to have this big headline policy about a penny on the income tax for schools. And then after going into coalition with the Tories, they really lost that. And their rating among teachers and on the question of education really took a massive nosedive. And so, to be honest, it's something a little bit desperate about it, just saying, please don't forget about us. This was something we once cared about. We do still care about it. Look at us, please, for 5 minutes. And it might work, but it does have a slight whiff of desperation about it.
Emily Ashton, a whiff of desperation. How do you see this?
I think Raphael's right in that I think the Lib Dems might be lucky to be in a coalition at all. We'll have to see how many seats they get. But obviously they are trying to position themselves. Look, we're a party of government, we're serious, take us seriously. We want to up education funding up to 55 billion. That's more than anybody else has pledged. And yet it is convincing those teachers and those people working in education, those students, that they can be trusted on education again.
And bear in mind also that the Labour Party have said they would effectively ring-fence the education budget. The Conservatives said they would ring-fence the schools budget, not quite the same thing, but everyone's promising to spend money on education. So it's kind of a red line, but it's not as if there's anyone going into this election saying we wouldn't spend money on schools. So it's not actually making it that hard for anyone to form a partnership with them.
Let's see how this is all playing out on social media. A couple of tweets for you. First from Ian Dunt at politics.co.uk. First, the Lib Dems aren't doing red lines. Now they are. An unkind observer might suggest they're not really in position to limit their options, which touches on what you were saying, Raphael. I mean, I think Lord Ashcroft's latest poll puts them at something like 9%, doesn't it?
Yes, and Ian's got a point there about the slight sort of uncomfortable shift in Lib Dem tone. Nick Clegg seems to be quite happy to go out and say, under these circumstances I would form a government. I wouldn't necessarily want to do a deal with the SNP. I don't like UKIP, not a big fan of the DUP. Lots of other Lib Dems are saying, well, steady on here, Nick. Actually, you know, when beggars can't be choosers, and can we just wait and see what happens when the votes are in and decide what we do. So there's a bit of a sort of fragmentation in the Lib Dem position on this.
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because we've got Jason Beattie, a tweet. He's at the Daily Mirror. David Laws last week, we are not using the language of red lines. Clegg today, I can confirm a Lib Dem red line on education spending. And Emily, I suppose it does beg the question, as we've been talking about, as are they really in a position to talk about red lines? I mean, let's face it, before a vote has even been cast.
No, well, exactly. But you know, this is setting out they are a serious party. But as Raphael points out, it's not necessary. It's not an overly controversial pledge. You know, all parties are committed to upping spending on education. This isn't scrapping tuition fees.
No, although it will be interesting to see if they come up with any other red lines, for example, on the EU. Anyway, more from you both in the coming minutes, so